Turkey's president has said it is not in anyone's interest to prolong a diplomatic row between Qatar and its neighbours. Recep Tayyip Erdoğan is in Saudi Arabia to meet King Salman. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain and Egypt have cut ties with Qatar, accusing the Gulf state of supporting terrorism. Mr Erdoğan will also travel to Kuwait and Qatar. Well, with me is Michael Daventry, a freelance journalist based in London. Michael, let's just begin by setting out why Turkey feels it is its place to step in and try and intervene in this row, given that it's not a Gulf country itself.
Well, it's not a Gulf country, you're right, but Qatar is a hugely important ally of Turkey. Over the last decade or so, I'm a Turkish journalist, and I've certainly seen a lot of closening ties between the two. Lots of Qatari investment in Turkey, specifically around families that are very closely aligned to President Erdoğan as well. So there's a big connection there. But if you look at, for instance, the Turkish equivalent of Sky, which owns the Turkish football rights, that's owned by a Qatari company, by Al Jazeera. There are lots of connections between the two countries. So there's business and there's also faith. President Erdoğan has increasingly in recent years been described as a connection between the Muslim Brotherhood aspect of the ways of governing countries. So there's both business and faith as ways of connecting the two.
So we're right then in assuming that President Erdoğan will be intervening as an advocate on Qatar's behalf rather than a completely impartial mediator?
Well, he's already spoken on Qatar's behalf. He's said that it's an injustice what's happened to Qatar. The interesting thing for me, I think, is whether or not this will be successful. Because if you looked at about 8 or 9 years ago, before the Arab Spring began, then you'd be able to say that Turkey genuinely is a mediating force in this part of the world, because it's Muslim, it's a democracy, and it's managed to show that those two things can work together. But the Arab Spring didn't work for Turkish mediation, and Syria was devastatingly the biggest example of that. This is a key test for President Erdoğan. He's trying to see now whether he can, with another crisis in another part of the Middle East, whether he can actually be the mediating force that he says he is.
Of course, it's a tricky line for him to tread, because on the one hand, he has the, I suppose, the political allegiance to Qatar, but trade with Saudi Arabia is also very important for Turkey, and he won't want to spoil that relationship.
Absolutely, and exponentially higher. And if you take the 4 groups with Saudi, Egypt, Bahrain and the UAE, of course it's much higher in terms of trade than Qatar by itself. And Egypt is another interesting example from that point of view, because ever since the coup in Egypt, Turkish-Egyptian relations have never really picked up. And there was a phone call today between the Egyptian and Turkish foreign ministers. That was one of the first direct high-level contacts between the two countries in many months. So this might be an opportunity from Turkey's point of view to start rebuilding ties.
OK, Michael, thanks very much. Really good to get your thoughts on that. Michael Daventry, thank you.